when you talk about the direction is sometimes being short-sighted, I do recognize that our pendulum swings, from where we were with uh, President Biden for 4 years. Look at what a difference we have as a presence on the world stage within a year and a half of Donald Trump being president. We are navigating completely different waters than I think anyone could have ever fathomed to comprehend in, in the previous 4 years of the Democrats holding the presidency.
We all deserve better. And that's not a Democrat Republican thing. I think for decades, our government has been very underwhelming with actually solving problems that matter for people. And we're getting to a point, an inflection point, where that can't be the case moving forward. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of Two Dudes and a Pup. And I want to level set some expectations here. Isaac and I are just two dudes trying to figure out what is going on in the world. And boy, over the last few weeks, we've gotten plenty of stuff to talk about. We have plenty of stuff to talk about today. And Patty is here with us, taking a nap, probably doing more for self-care than either Isaac or I ever do. And I think we could both learn a lesson from Patty's overall vibes. And she'll probably drop off here soon just to get her beauty rest. But Isaac, how are you doing?
I'm good. I decided to switch it up, and instead of reporting from my office, I'm on the beach in Los Angeles, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, just to get some perspective, kind of open up the environment. And it's good to see you, brother. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday. It's great to see you too. I think I grew up on the East Coast, and I think there's just something really magical, I guess would be the right word, to be able to look out at the ocean. And absolutely. I always found it really humbling to just stand on a beach looking at the ocean, just say, if I keep going, I'll run into, in your case, Hawaii. If I just keep going, I'll run into Japan. If I just keep going, I'll run into China. It really always, as much as the distances are vast and it's hard to comprehend how long it would take you to sail there or whatever, it's a straight shot. Like there's nothing really in between you and other parts of the world. And I just always found it as a way to think about how much more connected we are than we really think about on a daily basis. And Absolutely. It's just soothing.
Yeah. It's not lost on me that this podcast came about because of our conversations on the beach, doing a bonfire and just chilling.
Yeah, totally. And I'm going to take Patty off here so she can rest without having to worry about camera angles or anything. And I think it's worth jumping into the highlights from the news, because I don't think we can get to everything that's in the news for this week. But boy, there's been some big highlights. Anything top of mind you want to jump into?
No, you go first.
Okay, cool. The first thing, as much as I don't want to make this entire episode about it, the whole Iran situation since the last time we chatted has been dynamic, to say the least. And I want to focus on the sort of geopolitics of it all. The United States and Israel launched attacks against Iran. We all know that. But over the course of this past weekend, I forgot exactly what day, Vice President J.D. Vance went to Pakistan to try to take part in negotiations around a 10-point plan the Iranian government put out. Came back 16 hours later, stopped by Hungary on his way back or on his way there, and ultimately came back without a peace plan. And then they had a peace plan, but then there was disagreements with what that peace plan was, whether or not Lebanon was included or not, whether or not Israel attacks in Lebanon or Lebanon was included or not. And then it was on again, off again, on again. We're blockading the Strait of Hormuz after Iran wouldn't open it up. Then they opened it up, then they shut it, then we blockaded it. I don't even know what the current situation is, to be totally honest with you. This is like the weirdest on again, off again international diplomacy scene I could ever remember. And
I think as of this morning, I just checked the news, and Iran had struck a vessel or attacked a vessel that was leaving the straits.
Yeah, and this is stuff that matters. Like, we all see it at the gas pump. That's the most easy place to see it. What I think not enough people are talking about is something like 20 or 30% of the world oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz because of how much of the oil for not just Iran, but Kuwait, the southern part of Iraq, the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. It all goes through there, but then also a byproduct of oil production is fertilizer. And
Right.
something like 20 to 30% of the world's fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz, which means not just price of food, but actual supply of food is about to be really impacted. And oh, by the way, I saw reports over this last week just to try to educate myself saying that if we didn't have any fertilizer, our planet can only sustain like 1 to 2 billion people. And
Right.
we're sitting at like 7, 8, 9 billion, somewhere in there. And so fertilizer matters. And if you disrupt that flow of fertilizer, people are going to have famine and people are going to die. It's going to be really consequential, which, by the way, only brings about more instability, which comes back and bites us in other ways. So, all this to say, I don't know what your take on it is, Isaac. My take is I think all of these actions, which there were other options we could have taken that were proving successful. The maximum pressure campaign with sanctions was proving successful. That's why we were negotiating with the Iranian regime in the first place. The previous deal we had under the Obama administration was, for everything we know, effective at what the American goal was, which was to not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And yet, this administration and the key players in it, and by the key players, I mean President Trump himself, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, all seem to be either some combination of incompetent, insincere, or just very insecure about what they're actually trying to do. And I think it has ripple effects for the rest of us. I think we all deserve better leaders at these moments, especially when these moments could have been totally avoided. But that's my personal opinion on that. I kind of went off the fact train. But when you're looking at the news about Iran, what do you make of it all?
I've heard whispers, and I don't know if it's true, but there are people talking about part of the deal would mean Donald Trump is talking or working through what it would mean to lift $20 billion worth of sanctions money and funding that we've tangled up and frozen from Iran, but in a trade-off that they would need to hand us all their enriched uranium. So I don't know if that's true, but it's very interesting that we are trying to leverage military action and negotiations and diplomacy to try and figure out how to get this country that for years has been a rogue nation and has uh, uh, been someone that we've, as a nation, had to deal with, that is a threat, but also they operate by a different set of, I would say, strategic thinking and decision making processes. I'm very curious to know who is negotiating these deals, and also is the new Ayatollah the son of the previous Ayatollah, is he involved, and how much is he involved in these discussions? And also, like you said, the ripple effect of what we're working through is impacting everyone, some countries more than others, whether it's fertilizer, oil, gas. Um, there are some countries that really need us to figure this out quick because they're running on empty already. And the minute that the oil is not coming out of that strait, it is now impacting them to the point of almost a state of emergency. And so uh, I appreciate and understand your take on our leadership and those in a decision-making role. But I also know that personally, I wish them the best and I wish them success. And I want to see a solution as soon as possible for the sake of everybody involved. Um, this 2-week ceasefire and America blockading the blockade, Iran then announcing the blockade is now reopened, the straits reopened, only to then see this morning there's been attacks on vessels. Uh, my heart is heavy because of all of those involved, whether it's people in the U.S. military, the people of Iran. There's so much going on. I don't even know what to think. I've been constantly just trying to keep up. But as you said, there's just so much. It's like drinking from a fire hose to sift through all the information, all the news reports, the podcasts, the interviews, the news releases, the press releases, and the press conferences. Constantly just trying to get ahead of what's coming down the pipeline, whether it's Americans, the rest of the world, NATO, our world leaders, our allies. Everybody is trying to figure out what is happening, and it's been a month and a half of really the world feeling like it's upside down.
Yeah, and I also want to just echo what you were saying. As much as I am disappointed in our leadership, as much as I don't politically support them, I do want them to be successful. Billions of people are counting on it. And oh, by the way, thousands of American service members. And oh, by the way, millions of people in other countries that had nothing to do with this. I genuinely hope for success, for the best case of success. I worry that the best case of success is actually really detrimental to what we want in the long run.
Sure.
And we could really pull that apart if you want. There's other podcasts who are really diving deep into this with professors who study it far longer than either of us have. But, you know, it's always interesting to me how much we talk about other countries in America like it's something hard to understand. And yet, when we got attacked on 9/11, the amount of, you know, patriotic fervor that came out after that for people that weren't aligned at all with the Bush administration leading into it, like I don't ever remember a time in our lifetime where we felt more united to go do something serious. And I really worry that within Iran, these continued attacks, these on again, off again agreements that are hard to make sense of, isn't just hard for Americans to make sense of. I think it's really hard for people in Iran to know which way the wind is blowing. And there's a pro democracy faction that wants to not live under the theocratic government that they've been living under since the 1970s. And yet, I think even them are saying, hey, we're actually going to need to have a nuclear weapon at some point to keep us safe from stuff like this. And I really worry that our short-sightedness as a country, and this isn't a partisan political thing, it's a more national security, foreign affairs thing. Our system of government tends to be short-sighted. And we used to have a sort of overall philosophy of foreign policy that bridged both Democrats and Republicans for decades during the Cold War. But during the Cold War, it was relatively easy because you had like one bad guy that you really just had to like figure out what you wanted to do with, being the Soviet Union. Ever since then, it's been really hard to pinpoint what the American foreign policy position is throughout the world. Even our national security documentation, which I'm a nerd, I read all of them, the actual strategies that each administration produces get more and more and more abstract. Like, to have a real strategy, you need to be able to say, here's what we're trying to achieve, here's the end state we're trying to land at. And most administrations, Democrat or Republican, don't ever get around to actually saying that outright. And I know there's a whole bunch of politics or geopolitics involved, but I think Americans, you and I, and everyone listening to this, deserve to know, what are our billions of dollars of taxpayers' money going for? What are the people who are being deployed to all these countries that have American bases in it actually trying to achieve for us? And I think we need to get back to a realistic conversation about that. But now I'm going way past the current situation in Iran and just like kind of talking macro about American politics and how I wish it was more transparent.
Chris, I think as you talk and as I think about it, there are two things that come to mind for me that I feel like are unique to the American story. And that is, one, when you look at world leaders on the world stage, some of our adversaries, their leaders have been in power for years and plan on staying in power for years. I think of Vladimir Putin. He's been winning his elections for a while now. And I don't know what the exact number is, but I think it's safe to say he's at least been the leader of Russia for 17 plus years. I know Xi Jinping of China has been in charge for a while and plans on staying there for a while. I know the Ayatollah in Iran, up until he was decimated by a missile strike, had been in charge for many, many years. I know Kim Jong-un is planning on being in charge until he hands it off to, I believe, someone in his family. But it's very unique to the American story that every 4 years, we have the option to replace, reset, and renew or change the direction of our country by voting in a new president, and that even if a president gets reelected, he has a limit of 8 years as a term, and then within 2 years, even if a current sitting president like Trump has with the Senate and the House and holds a majority in all three levels of government, that within 2 years, as we're talking now about the primaries and the midterms, that even that can change. And the second half of a presidency can be very difficult for the president to maneuver or make massive decisions because he does not have the majority in the House or the Senate. And so I think it's, when you talk about the direction sometimes being short-sighted, I do recognize that our pendulum swings, from where we were with President Biden for 4 years. Look at what a difference we have as a presence on the world stage within a year and a half of Donald Trump being president. We are navigating completely different waters than I think anyone could have ever fathomed to comprehend in the previous 4 years of the Democrats holding the presidency. The other thing that I feel like is important for me to share would be whether it was 2008 and the collapse or the struggles in the economics of the world stage, or with the pandemic. Something that has become very clear to me is how interconnected we are as a planet in a way that maybe never before in history it was before, where if somebody gets sick in Wuhan, China, and gets on an airplane, very quickly that flu or COVID sickness can easily spread to the entire globe within a matter of days. And very quickly, we're dealing with an international pandemic across the globe in a way that maybe before might not have spread the same way. That whether it's our shipping, whether it's our ports and our truckers delivering goods, those driving semis, that the pandemic really showed me just from farm to table, the agricultural element and what it takes for us to eat, as you mentioned, just how many people are eating, water, power, electricity, that all these different things that we have really been experiencing what I think is an incredible time period of great luxury, success, opulence, growth, and financial stability, where, it doesn't take much for things to change or for challenges, black swan events to come about. And I just see that the world is really trying to wrap its head around what happens when 20% of the world's energy supply suddenly gets tangled up. How did we allow this to happen? What do we do now that it's happening? How quickly can we get back to business as usual? But I think one thing the pandemic really helped me to understand is, going forward, maybe nothing is going to return to the way it was, and that forever we are going to be in a changing world order and a global exchange of events and challenges that forever make it where there are always unpredictable and events that happen. I don't know what you would say to that, but I'm very curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, a couple things to pull out. One, I think, and I get the story and the basic idea you had of how much the pendulum is swinging, and I mean we can go back even further, right? From George W. Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. Like, it feels like the pendulum swings an awful lot. I would just say a lot of what these administrations are trying to do and foreshadowing what they're trying to do is actually very doable. It's, as much as there's this narrative that no one could have predicted what Trump is doing right now, there was also a lot written about what Trump is actually doing right now. But it also gets, I think nowadays, the part that's hard for most people is how much is talked about the campaigns and how much of it is just pure marketing and how to make sense of it all is sort of the modern day censorship, which is no one can really stop anyone from getting their message out. But boy, if you just flood the zone, it's hard to know which one to pay attention to. And I think that's something we have to wrap our head around, because I think we need some rules about how the information flow is actually supposed to work, especially when you're talking about things like presidential campaigns. The second thing I would say is, as much as you're spot on with the opportunity of Americans to vote in and redirect the government every 4 years for president, every 2 years for the entire House of Representatives, and one third of the Senate, there's also 600,000 elected officials in this country. And most everyone, regardless of where you live, has an election every single year. Some of it might be municipal level or your town or county, some of it's state level, some of it's federal level. But that's also a good spot to get engaged, because it may feel really hard to change who's going to be the presidential candidates for 2028, right? But it's actually really sort of easy to show up with 20 of your friends and fundamentally get to decide who your state rep is going to be. A lot of these races are determined by tens of votes, not hundreds of thousands or millions of votes. So there's a whole lot more opportunity to get a chance to say what direction you want government to go in, as long as you're a little open to different levels of government. And oh, by the way, for those who are elected in office, they pay attention to this stuff. If you start seeing, and I don't really care which way it goes, but right now we're seeing Democrats winning special elections for county and state offices that you never would have thought would have been in play. And you better believe the national parties are paying attention to that, to figure out how are they winning, what's the message, what direction do we need to go in. That's a way to send a really strong signal. And it's amazing to me how many, or how much fewer people show up to vote in those elections. So if you want to try to figure out where can you have outsized political power, show up where people aren't, and that's generally voting in down ballot races or in off cycle races. Because I think at this point, no race is truly off cycle. They all send the message. And then the last thing I would say, and I'm just riffing off of everything you were just talking about, which I largely agree with, by the way, I'm just trying to add a little bit on top of it, is that I think you're exactly right. The idea, and this is talked about an awful lot, the idea that we should just have as a goal to bounce back to where we were sometime before isn't really a realistic goal, no matter what you're talking about. It's everything's dynamic. It's all moving forward. And if you want to talk to bring it back to the whole Iran situation, I don't think there's any chance we can just pretend like we reset the clocks as though it was all 40 days ago or 45 days ago or like all before this happened. I don't think that state can exist again. I don't know what is going to exist after an agreement is made or what is going to have to, be taken in order to get there. I would say, as much as there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of punditry about it, the things I would look for if you're really trying to make sense of what might be coming next is the things that people can't have talking points about. Look at where the actual military resources are and where they aren't. If you start seeing a whole bunch of US military resources leave the area, I think we're heading towards a peace deal. But carrier groups and a whole bunch of other things that that get written about but like aren't headline news is how to make sense of it. And I think making sense of it is important to really try to figure out where each and every one of us may land at for what version do you want to exist tomorrow? What world do you want it to try to be creating? Because the idea that we could just bounce back and pick a date on a calendar and say everything was great then, could we just return to then, isn't realistic at all. Whatever it is, things are moving too fast. AI is reshaping the nature of work. The big tech companies have been running amok, in my opinion, for a long time with technology like social media that has us ripping ourselves apart in terms of communities, in terms of families. Our politics, I don't think, are ever going to go back to the way that they were before Trump got into politics, because I don't think he's the cause of it. I think he's a representation of what was already there.
Sure.
I just think like the thinking that led to the problems we have, generally speaking, is not the same thinking that we need to solve the problems we have. That's all abstract. I'm happy to like break it down in more concrete terms, but I think you're exactly right in that we need to build a better future for tomorrow. And you can't just say, hey, here's a date on the calendar I want to go back to. That's just not realistic at all. And with that being said, I kind of think one of those watershed moments that also happened in the last couple of weeks that got a lot of press attention was Anthropic, one of the leading AI companies or research labs or whatever you want to call it, launched a tool called Mythos. And I know you have some cybersecurity awareness in your background, expertise in your background. For me, when I saw that article, I kind of shrugged it off because AI tools like being able to be used to understand where cybersecurity vulnerabilities are makes total sense to me. Also, the flip side of that is probably equally true. You can probably open up the ability of hackers that don't need to have the skill of coding anymore to actually hack those vulnerabilities is probably true. So the proliferation of like these vulnerabilities being important and more people being able to take advantage of them, probably true. The idea that those vulnerabilities weren't already there and people just didn't know about it, that's the part I really struggle with. And when this article broke, I kind of just shrugged it off and said, well, that's not new, really. And then my boss, who's fairly well educated, was just beside himself, not realizing that we lived in a world where we have cybersecurity vulnerabilities in our national infrastructure, like our power grids and whatnot. And I just remember going back to my grad school days at Georgetown, a guy by the name of Richard Clark, who worked in the White House back in the 90s. And basically, he told the story. He wrote a book about it called Cyber War, I believe.
Absolutely.
And in this book and in person, he just tells his story of like, hey, a couple fundamental things you need to understand. When we created and when our researchers created the internet, they were trying just to get computers and networks to talk to each other for the purpose of research. Security wasn't built into it because hard enough of a technological leap to just make it all work. And oh, by the way, when we start experiencing terrorist attacks like Oklahoma City and other things in the 90s, and the White House started to look into like, hey, where are we vulnerable? Because people who lived through this time can remember a time before we had vehicle barriers up around every federal building, before there was security to go to the airport. You could just wander in and go to a gate and hang out with your people until they boarded an airplane. Like all that stuff before the 90s and then definitely before 9/11 is just a totally different world. And part of that, when they went out and did that research to figure out where are our vulnerabilities, they pretty quickly determined that we have these massive vulnerabilities in the cyber domain. The ability of a nation state hacker to hack in and like turn off the power or to reverse the spin of generators that are producing power and take out power for like 6 to 12 months at a time because we don't just have like turbines on the ready to plug in. It's not something you can do from an engineering perspective. Isn't new, but there also isn't a good answer to it. And oh, by the way, like half the computer chips in the world are made by China, which has a whole bunch of question marks around it. A whole bunch of our computer chips are being made in Taiwan. And how much do you want that entire supply chain to be that close to the Chinese border is a question that's been debated for decades now. And then all the just pure cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And oh, by the way, like the United States doesn't have the sort of culture to do what other countries are doing. By that, I mean China as a country, for their entire country to be connected to the rest of the world's internet, most of the traffic goes through underwater fiber optic cables. And same thing for us. And yet in China, when all those cables come into their country, there is a physical switch that they can turn to take themselves off the world internet. So if they ever get attacked from a cyber attack and they can just make themselves their own internal internet in like a minute, or I don't know how long it would take, but they can flip physical switches. We don't have that. We will never accept that as a country. We don't want our government to have that kind of power.
Sure.
But boy, like this stuff isn't new. And it's just been interesting to me to watch highly educated people all of a sudden understand how fragile, how vulnerable the systems that they just take for granted are. And I just took for granted that everyone kind of knew it. And boy, that article about Mythos and the tool that Anthropic released for me was really insightful. How many people around me just didn't know the sort of vulnerabilities that exist all around us, and they were kind of happy in their ignorance. When I started just rattling it all off, it got pretty gloomy pretty immediately. So I don't know if you have any perspective on that, but yeah, it's an
Chris,
interesting.
You've opened up Pandora's box because for me, when you talk, as you know, I did my time in the military and got out, went to do my master's in public policy, but that led very quickly to an opportunity at the Pentagon doing cybersecurity and being in the Presidential Management Fellowship, where I got to sit at the feet of some 4-star generals, 3 stars, senior executive service members, civilian leaders, to just really understand the challenges of cyber. And that led me to get a second master's in strategic cyber operations and information management from George Washington University, just to try and wrap my head around what was at stake in 2013, 14, 15, as I was coming in to my role as a presidential fellow. The Department of Defense was really trying to wrap its head around Congress. What does it mean that we have these vulnerabilities? And to your point about our power grid, it was actually my final master's degree assignment was a semester-long exploration of a scenario where each of us in the cohort of my master's program got handed a different scenario to work through and try and respond to. And mine happened to be a cyber attack in the Northwest of America in the middle of winter, impacting 13 states in the middle of February, in the deepest, coldest part of the winter, in the middle of a nor'easter, where very quickly in the beginning of my semester, it's a 20-page document that I had to read through and kind of explore how would I respond if I was the governor of the state of Washington. And what I read and what I studied and worked through literally made me sick to my stomach. It was so difficult to wrap my head around just how bad this scenario laid out got, how quickly, with people freezing to death, hospitals running out of power, with the electric grid shut off, people were, in the scenario, they were trapped underground in subways. People, in order to stay warm, were, it's obviously a story, but they were lighting fires in their apartments inside just to stay warm, and by doing so, setting entire apartment complexes on fire. At the same time, if you lose power like that, you have no ability to communicate via internet, phone, television. All these different resources get shut off. And so the real question was, as the governor of a state, how was I to help the people or direct those in a position to provide support, food, supplies, resources, to get the power grid back up, especially if it's going to take 3 to 6 months to repair. So that very quickly woke me up to just how fickle our power grid is, and the cybersecurity threat. Someone in my master's program politely explained to me, one of the professors talked through, you can have all the cybersecurity set in place and everything set up, but if your people are using the word password as their password and never bother to change it or to make it more difficult to get in, or if someone decides to install a smart air conditioner into the building that is Wi-Fi connected, very quickly, even with all the millions of dollars spent, there's now a back door through the air conditioning unit that allows you to get into the system. And just the number of scenarios that we talked through, the challenges we face. I saw, U.S. Cyber Command get stood up within the DoD, and just establishing that to understand there's a whole new frontier and a whole new terrain of challenges. But if I can go back, I would say part of what I've been trying to understand and research and read about and learn is that what we're dealing with Iran and Israel and Trump leading a military strikes, it's my understanding that it's to make sure that they don't get a nuclear weapon, and that they are not able to get that capability. You know, back in the day in World War II, Oppenheimer and the teams in New Mexico developed Fat Man and Little Boy, the 2 atomic bombs, and we dropped those on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And very quickly, we're able to end that war and come up with a solution. But ever since, there's been an arms race, and there was the Cold War, trying to figure out how to make sure as few people as possible get access to that power and that nuclear capability. And fast forward, we are now in 2026, and it's not lost on me, and I think it's fascinating that we are still struggling with and trying to ensure that the wrong people don't get access to a nuclear capability, while we're now in a new arms race to develop AI, which could be just as monumental and life-changing as the nuclear capabilities. And then my other thing that I wanted to ask you really is, as we look at what's happening with AI, because I know the AI doc that I watch, it's in movie theaters right now. Tristan Harris from the Center of Humane Technology is in that movie. And I've also been watching podcasts where he tries to explain modern wisdom, Diary of a CEO. He's on multiple different podcasts trying to get the message out that as we develop AI and as we put AI into the hands of the masses and governments and intelligence teams and military structure, how do we regulate that and make sure that we do it in a safe way? At the same time, my question to you is this, Chris. What do you think about the fact that Iran is being hammered for their um, efforts to develop a nuclear weapon, yet our ally Israel is not a part of the non-prolific nuclear treaty or whatever? I butchered that one, but they've never signed and agreed to not having nukes. And it's my understanding that they have potentially between 80 to 200 nuclear warheads. And what are your thoughts on our ally encouraging us and supporting us to start a war with Iran to make sure they don't get a nuke? Yet I believe that our ally Israel does also have nuclear capabilities that they've never agreed or signed up not to use.
So much to unpack.
Sorry.
All good. First and foremost, let's start and hold me accountable to answering that question specifically,
Yep.
but I want to set the stage a little bit more, especially around the non-proliferation treaty and other parts of the nuclear policy side of this, because this is actually something I know pretty well, because my minor, or basically my engineering sequence at West Point, was nuclear engineering. And so we had to take classes in weapon design and reactor design. And because I had that knowledge when I went to Georgetown, I specifically took classes in the nuclear policy side. And not a whole lot of people understand both the technical side and the policy side. What I would say, and your background is largely spot on, we created nuclear weapons coming out of World War II. We, our American thinkers, thought that put us so far ahead that we had serious conversations about whether we needed a conventional military anymore. And a couple years later, it turns out that the Soviet Union had spies that got information about how nuclear weapons were made, and they made their own. All of a sudden, we weren't the only people in the world with nuclear weapons.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, a couple other countries decided, hey, they need their own. And, the UK and France developed their own. China eventually developed their own. And India and Pakistan also have their own. Those are all the declared states or countries that have nuclear weapons. To your point, Israel is the undeclared one that pretty much everyone knows they have them. And of course, we also have North Korea, where everyone knows they have them, although the numbers and estimates of what they can and can't do are fluctuate, right? With that being said, when these weapons started to proliferate, and proliferation just means spreading, so other countries wanting to develop them, we, in countries who have this power, recognize that accidents happen when you make nuclear weapons. They're not airtight. They cost a lot of money. And oh, by the way, like the more people that have them, the higher likelihood that they will use them. That somewhere along the decision tree, someone will say, yes, we're going to launch them. And the problem with that, and there's two books I would call people to, a more recent one by Annie Jacobson, who wrote about what
Yeah.
nuclear war would look like. She's also done podcasts if you want to go that
Yep.
route. There's an older book, or not really older book, but an older time period of book called The Doomsday Machine, written by Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg is made famous for the Pentagon Papers. He worked at RAND. He was a actual nuclear policy analyst who went around to understand how nuclear policy work. And then he kind of got a bit of a side hustle from the Secretary of Defense to go to Vietnam and understand how that was playing out. And he was so concerned about what was going on in both Vietnam and in our nuclear arsenal and decision making and whatnot that he broke the law and stole classified documents, released the Pentagon Papers to the Washington Post, which has movies about it. It's a very well-known story. Most people don't know is the bulk of the files he stole were actually about the nuclear system that we had to manage our own nuclear weapons. And in the height of the Cold War, we had tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. And what most people don't know is we use those weapons every single day in what we call deterrence, which basically says, hey, you're not going to come and try to wipe me out because I can wipe you off the face of the planet.
Sure.
It's this, by the way, it's the same logic that if you're getting into a situation that you don't want to have to fight, the bigger, badder, more muscular threat you can look, the less likely you're actually going to have to fight. It's the same logic on a personal level, just at a international stage level. And what Daniel Ellsberg was so concerned about in the height of the Cold War, that we had all of these systems to try to make it impossible to have someone out there in the middle of the Pacific Theater be able to launch a nuclear weapon on their own. By someone, I mean like quite literally like a major or lieutenant colonel or captain even flying in a plane that had a nuclear weapon. And those were in the ages before satellite communications, in the ages before being able to have connection. Turns out the system and the safeguards we had weren't really all that effective. And if you want to read all about it, read Doomsday Machine, of how crazy it got in the sort of nuclear arms race age, of how easy it would have been to start a war. And the fact we've had these weapons for 7 or 8 decades now, and we haven't started a war, or we haven't had an accidental nuclear discharge, is borderline a miracle. And so part of the reason why we as a country don't want other
Maybe
countries
not borderline, Chris, maybe actually a miracle.
It might actually be a miracle. It's one of the things that people that do international relations for a long time realize you have to think probabilistically. That sounds fancy. The thing I would just say is, if there's a 1% chance you could have a nuclear weapon go off, all right, you can feel pretty good in any given year that won't go off. But if you have 100 years, it's almost a certainty it's going to go off. And I'm not going to do the math for you right now. We can do it on some other episode. But at the end of the day, we don't want these weapons to spread, because we recognize, as much as deterrence is thought to be in our national interest, we also don't want to exponentially expand all the different decision makers and the opportunities for mistakes to happen. And we have not countless, we can count them. We have a lot of examples from the Cold War of where nuclear war almost started because a radar system malfunctioned, because someone didn't get a word in a submarine. And a lot of times it came down to one person just saying, no, I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do, and quite literally gambling the entire fate of the world on that one decision. So we want to try to minimize that. Also, I would say, with the modern nuclear weapons we have now, when we first started making them in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, we kept making bigger and bigger and bigger weapons, more and more and more of them. At some point, our scientists realized, and this is all publicly available data and information, that it only takes less than 100 weapons going off to create nuclear winter that would kill almost every human being on the planet. We have over 5,000 weapons, or around 5,000 weapons. Russia has about the same. The UK and France has a few hundred. China has a few hundred, and they're trying to make more now. Pakistan and India, I forgot how many they have. North Korea, you hear different reports. And then there's Israel. And I would just say this. If you read Annie Jacobson's book, where you realize because of how high stakes these weapons are, and recognizing
Right.
that like an intercontinental ballistic missile going from Russia to the US or vice versa takes like 28 minutes. And so, you only have like 12 minutes to make a decision. For one weapon to go off, it can trigger a whole bunch of decisions from countries with a lot more weapons that could end all of humankind. That's not a world I want to live in. And I really worry that not just Israel, but honestly, us and Russia and the UK and France and China and India and Pakistan all have these weapons. We all have this ability at some point to just decide the threat is high enough. We need to launch them. And the consequences of launching them is real for billions of people across the planet. And oh, by the way, at the same time, where we need to figure out how to produce more electricity than ever in the history of humankind in order to feed these AI models or allow the cost of electricity to go through the roof and just start experiencing brownouts all over the place. I would love to live in a world where we take 1/3 of our nuclear arsenal, because if it only takes 100 weapons to destroy all of humankind, why do we need 5,000? And let's use that nuclear material to create clean energy to actually fuel the AI revolution that we're all living through. We already mined it. We already did the environmental damage of enriching it. We can dilute it back down, use it in a reactor, and hopefully by the time that we use up all that material, we'll have cold fusion and something else.
Sure.
Right? And this is the sort of I'm taking your question and running with it, but this is the stuff that when I'm just looking at it from my sort of engineer background, and then I look at how we as a government and we as Americans just expect the status quo sort of for everything out of our own government. Ever since Reagan came on the scene and said government is the problem, we have all sort of accepted, and I'm guilty of this too, to say like government can't solve big problems, but we used to do it all the time. It was government that made nuclear weapons. It was government that made global positioning systems. It was government that made the internet as we know it. Everything in your smartphone that makes it smart was an invention of the United States government. And I think we need to have a new reference point that says we need to expect a whole lot more out of government to actually solve these problems, because billions of lives are hanging on in the balance all day, every day. And the fact that we haven't solved them yet, we should all take as a slap in the face to do better. And in order to do better, we all have to get way more informed to demand better of the people who are leading the system. And I think that includes AI and what that's going to mean for people's jobs. I think that also includes, we had agreements with Iran that legitimately stopped them enriching uranium above what they needed for their reactors. And we had proven it. And the fact that we allowed some president to rip it all up without really having any political blowback, which got us to this moment in the first place. Now we're spending billions of dollars to try to prevent them from doing what they're already prevented to do. Just seems kind of insane to me, as much as I will also agree with you that I want our administration, as much as I don't like it, to be successful, to like bring this all to a conclusion. They also created the problem in the first place. And I just think like we can't start creating new problems to act like we're solving them. We have plenty of problems already. Nuclear weapons are one. AI, cyber capabilities are just ones we're talking about on this one podcast. And there's actual answers for it. And I know I'm getting a little bit worked up right now, but boy,
you should.
Like, wouldn't it be a better world that we could live in if we would just say, hey, we want to use this technology to actually benefit the vast majority of people instead of making billionaires richer? Wouldn't it be great if we actually focus on making the international stage a far more stable environment so that our companies and workers can actually predict what's likely to happen, so we can create better technologies for more people and not just always use it for national security? I'm working on education stuff right now in the state of Connecticut. And boy, I would love for us to fund education like it was a national security priority instead of having to have bake sales in order to buy school supplies when we're dropping billions of dollars of ordnance in Iran every single day, which isn't making anyone in Iran safer. It's not making us safer at the end of the day. I just think we need to really reorient how we talk about our own government. And I blame Democrats and Republicans alike for decades. We need a whole lot better. We have problems. We also have solutions. And boy, when we start ripping off the Band-Aid and really talking about how vulnerable the entire system is from bad actors, how vulnerable the entire system is from our own power, how vulnerable the entire system is from a handful of people just deciding they want to stir things up. And I think we could look at that and all agree across political lines that like we all deserve better. Did I answer your question?
You answered a bunch. I know my questions oftentimes are open-ended and overarching and kind of vague, and I really appreciate your perspective. At some point, if I'm really being honest, I think there's a hypocrisy in place where we have Israel saying Iran should not have a nuclear capability, but they also have a nuclear capability
Yeah.
that they've never checked in with or agreed to abide by any sets of standards. So that's one thing, and the other is I am concerned that while we are still trying to figure out how to make sure world actors do not get access to nuclear capabilities, we are now introducing a new capability with AI, and it goes to your point about Anthropic, the Mythos system that they are kind of doing a soft release to the banks and the major corporations to give them a chance to understand there are now AI companies producing products that are so powerful that it is going to make even dumb people, for a better word, dangerous. And that while we are still trying to figure out how to make sure nuclear capabilities don't get into the wrong hands, we're opening up a whole new Pandora's box with AI by giving everybody the opportunity to have essentially brilliance and wisdom and endless knowledge and access to information. These AI systems are going to produce lone wolves and organizations, militias, rogue nations, people that should not get it. There are going to be some people that get a hold of AI that should not. And it's not lost on me that, there's a lot of good in this world. And I love the efforts on the parts of humanity to do better. But also, one of the things I studied in my master's program doing strategic cyber ops is the dark web and
Yeah.
just how much darkness and evil there is under the surface. There are some people with some really twisted perspectives and some really dark and evil incentives and hopes and dreams that they would like to produce results for. And I think that's one of the things that I love about America, or the thing that I appreciate about America, is how much work we've done since we created nuclear capability to try to restrain, even though we have the option to never use that capability again. And then at the same time, I think it's brilliant what you're talking about, that we could literally reroute the efforts of billions and trillions of dollars for nuclear capabilities to develop healthy, fresh energy sources, and reroute those destructive capabilities towards sustainable, amazing capabilities that could provide, power and life support for generations to come. So I guess my question to you, bouncing it back, is as you see us launching rockets to go around the moon, as you see the midterms coming up, as you see where we're at in negotiations back and forth with Iran, if we didn't do another podcast for a while and you were just to summarize your thoughts, or what's on your heart, what do you want to share to encourage the people listening going forward in this next chapter of 2026?
I think the thing that's top of mind for me right now, and I sort of foreshadowed this in my little rant I just did, we all deserve better. And that's not a Democrat Republican thing. I think for decades, our government has been very underwhelming with actually solving problems that matter for people. And we're getting to a point, an inflection point, where that can't be the case moving forward. And you talked about the dark web, and 100% agree that there's a lot of nastiness out there in the world. We're also seeing it in news every single day, how much nastiness there is. We also seen it, it's not just on the dark web anymore. I think this is why the Epstein files hit so hard, because it's not just Epstein and Maxwell and what they did to all the victims that they victimized over the decades. It's the fact that they operated over decades. It's the fact that people knew about it to varying degrees and didn't do anything about it, even when they had the power to. Even more so, the fact that they got sweetheart deals that allowed this intentionally to continue,
Yeah.
with all these innocent people being victimized, and people with money and power participated or did nothing to stop it. And they didn't have to pay any price until the very, very end. And that's not a dark web thing. It's just out there now. There are millions of documents that show how wide this net goes. And the fact that we're not pursuing that without fear or favor with the Department of Justice to get after all these folks is a really sad state of where we are at as a country. And that's not a partisan thing. That is just a social contract thing, where the way that we all get to live together, as much as we disagree from time to time, is that we have certain rules that we abide by. And right now, we are falling short of a lot of those rules in a lot of different ways. The thing I would say, as dark as it may seem, is there is network of money and power that is connecting in ways that we've never seen to really have dramatic impacts on everyone's life. But the way that you really go after or defeat a network is with another network. This is fundamentally what we learned in Iraq and Afghanistan, just applied in a different way. We learned in Iraq and Afghanistan that you can't kill or capture the entire list of bad guys to a better future. You have to create an entire network of people working together to build that future together. How does that at all apply to our current situation as a country right now? I would just say this. This is my biggest call to action to everyone. If you're tired of living with all these vulnerabilities that are just coming at us one after another, if you're tired of having to work multiple full-time jobs just to make ends meet, if you're tired of watching some people really get all the benefits because they have the money to invest, if you're tired of Epstein and like short-sighted international stuff, if you're tired of no one ever questioning how much money goes to the military, but then having to have bake sales to get like basic supplies into schools, if you're tired of any of this, be part of the change moving forward. And there's plenty of room. The easiest place to start is by talking to your friends, your neighbors, getting more informed, asking genuine questions to get engaged with the people around you. If you're an artist, make art. If you're a musician, make music. If you're a parent, talk to your kids about it. If you're a student, ask your teachers about it, write about it, wrestle with these ideas, and then talk about it. Social media has been used to really pit us against each other. I think we have to just throw away all the traditional labels, Democrats, Republican, conservative, progressive, whatever, and just start saying, like, what do you want the world to look like in the next few years? And be audacious about it. And I think if we do that, and there's real debates to be had, what can we afford? How do we do this? How do we go from where we're at to where we want to be? All fair game. But we also need to start normalizing the fact that right now is not where anyone wants to be. And I learned this in my EMT days. It's a little simplistic, but it works. When I was training to be an EMT, you learn very quickly, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And there's the paramedic or the EMT that may like be on the scene with the patient. But then you also need people to like control the crowd. You also need people to talk to the family, say like what sort of medications are on. You also need people to help drive the ambulance in the first place if it's not going to be you. There's plenty of ways to get involved. Sitting on the sideline and just complaining about it isn't doing anything. So you can certainly call your rep, call your senator, you can call your politicians, you can show up to vote in primaries, you can show up to vote and the 600,000 other elected officials we have in this country, there are plenty of ways to get engaged, but not being engaged isn't an option anymore. That's what I would say.
I love that. It brings to mind, I remember one of the most profound moments of my life, joining the military, going through basic, and of course, there's moments where you're in uniform walking through the airports, and you have your gear and you're getting ready to get back to it, or you're coming off a leave. And I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was the middle of 2007. I was getting ready to go over to Baghdad, and a man came out of a luggage. He had obviously started a small business in the airport selling luggage and Tumi and different types of suitcases. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for your service." He said, "I completely disagree with the war in Iraq." He said, "I disagree with the administration." He said, "But I also really appreciate your service." And it's a double-edged sword. I don't know how to process that. I very much thank you for being willing to serve, but I also don't think that you should be deploying to Iraq. And I very much, in that moment, realized how helpless he felt. And he was sharing with me. He said, I pushed back and I said, "Well, I'm just one person, but I know where I've planted my flag, and that is serving in the United States Army Infantry. There is something you can do. You can call your senator, you can call your legislators, you can call your state and local government and your federal government representatives to make a change." I said, "But also you can run for office. You could step up and be a part of the solution. You are not just one person working in a suitcase luggage company at the airport. You can rise above that to do more. Although it feels helpless, that mindset is the first challenge." And I scale that back now as I think about what's happening in the world. I know across the United States and the world, there are brilliant, thoughtful, critical thinkers, men and women that are gifted with every different type of brilliance, whether it's chemical or nuclear engineering, whether it's AI or research and development, whether it's politics, that there is a whole new generation coming up that has the capabilities and the gifts and the passion and the potential for selfless service. And I would just say that my challenge is not to take the mindset of the suitcase and luggage businessman in the airport, but like you said, to use all of these different things happening on the world stage in our society, whether it's AI, social media, the news, the White House, military conflicts, oil prices, that it would inspire you that if you're, anywhere from 16 to, I would say, 90 years old, that if you are so inspired to rise up and to push yourself to do the difficult thing, to choose maybe to go into a degree program in a college, or to do a job that maybe won't make the most money, but it's going to make a difference. And I reference Tristan Harris with the Center for Humane Technology. He does not even get a paycheck. All the money he makes from making documentaries, from speaking engagements, he pours that all back into his nonprofit because he wants to be able to share with his children that he did all he could to set them up for a better future. And I think his leadership and example of doing so, and you, Chris, I very much look at you as a leader who's living by example and pouring your heart and soul and resources and energy into being a change, or pushing for changes that you believe in. That's what makes America incredible, is that we have people coming from all over the world to come here and then immediately sink their teeth into how to make the country better, whether it's intelligence, FBI work, CIA work, nonprofits, NGOs, state and local just volunteer organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, the Big Brother, Big Sister. It doesn't matter how you do it. My challenge for this next chapter of people, I would ask you, do something. Sit down and think about what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you're good at, what you are not good at, and then be honest with yourself. How can you make a difference? And then go about setting that ball in motion. Go talk to a recruiter about military service. Look into the Coast Guard. Look at the Peace Corps. Look at AmeriCorps. Look at some of these programs that help humanity. The world is an endless list of possibilities. If you are so inclined to add value, there's room for you at the table. In addition to that, there's 2 books that I would challenge you as a listener. And Chris, if you haven't read them, one is called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and B, It's All Small Stuff by Richard Carlson, I believe PhD. And it is a simple book with many nuggets of wisdom for just how to frame and process challenges, overcoming adversity. But one of the things that stood out to me, he has a simple practice. I think it's on page 98 or something. It's in the very middle of the book. He talks about, if you're struggling to overcome, and if you're dealing with a set of challenges, mentally fast forward a year from now and imagine a year from now, will you even be able to remember what you're stressing about, what you're worried about? And if you think a year from now, you'd be able to remember what you're going through today and that it's monumental enough that you're going to be able to recall it, continue to focus on it. But if you do that practice and you come up with, no, I'm probably not going to be able to remember, use a year ago today. Chris, can you remember what you were worried about a year ago today?
Some yes, some no. The yes stuff's in the book. The no stuff, I can't remember. There's a whole bunch of stuff I sweated in the moment.
Absolutely. Yep. So that was a very powerful book for me to read, and I've given it out as a gift like candy. But the second book really changed my life even more. And for anybody looking for inspiration, it's called Into the Magic Shop by James Doty, MD, who created the Center for Compassion at Stanford University, who has gotten the largest donation from the Dalai Lama of any organization outside of Nepal. Into the Magic Shop is really a blueprint for reframing how you think, how you approach chasing your dreams and goals. And it's also James Doty's biography or autobiography of how he became a neurosurgeon and one of the most incredible doctors on the planet, but by overcoming incredible adversity in order to do so. And his story and his upbringing, growing up in Lancaster, California, I believe, Into the Magic Shop really is a one-stop shop book that if anybody out there is looking for motivation or inspiration or guidance on how to redirect their skills, their dreams, their goals, and their passions, I challenge you, read Into the Magic Shop by James Doty, MD, and Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and B, It's All Small Stuff by Richard Carlson.
I love those recommendations. All of them are great options. I know you recommended to me Into the Magic Shop years ago, and I still recommend it to other folks. The thing I would say, just to add on to all of this, is it's really easy to sit here and listen to both of us and say, yeah, but what can one person really do? And I have sort of 2 thoughts on that fundamental question, because it's a real question. And the answer is, you'd actually be surprised what one person could do. History is full of one person doing a whole lot. But I also think that's the wrong frame. And I think it's a wrong frame because one thing I've learned along the way is fear and distrust and just the idea that we're stuck is contagious. And it spreads like wildfire. But so is hope and a belief you can do something. And the thing that gets us moving from fear to hope is to see people doing it. And if your example of doing whatever you can in your own life with whatever you have to be part of the solution inspires 2 or 3 other people, then we can start a chain reaction that it's not just one person. Sure. One person's action inspires a couple other folks, inspire a couple other folks. And by the time it passes forward, now you have millions of people working to better the life for everyone around us. That's how you create the change. And for that, I would just say there's this fun YouTube video of how a social movement starts. And then, like, the example is a guy dancing in like this sort of picnic environment,
Yep.
and the guy's the leader, and he's dancing, no one else is dancing. And what you have to realize from that moment is the leader is not the most important person. The most important person is the first follower that says, I'm going to dance as well. And as soon as you get that first follower, then other people start saying, oh, I want to be a part of this. And then once you get enough people to be a part of it, now all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of people saying, I don't want to be left out of this.
Right.
And that's how movements happen. And so if you're sitting there, and by the way, right now, even though I've written a book, even though I've been doing all this work, I still have these moments where I'm just like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it worth all the time, energy, resources I'm pulling into it? And sometimes, like, I really do question it. So it's okay to question it. I just want to start there. But boy, I think those of us who are in a position to be able to do something really have the responsibility to be doing something. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but it has to be something. And the goal is absolutely fundamentally to change the entire system that has created the craziness that we're all living through right now. But it's also the intermediate goal is to inspire others along the way. And so that's why we're doing this podcast. I think we're probably going to take a break for a little while just to have some self-care and get some sleep, and we'll kind of look at how all the episodes went. But I also want to come back at it at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
So we'll probably break this up into seasons. I don't know if we'll do another episode or two before we officially end season 1, or if we'll just end it now. But I do want to come back. I love picking your brain, Isaac. All the recommendations you had for me over the years have been priceless. But I also want to inspire other people listening to this. Just because we're going to go on a little break at some point doesn't mean that. I would say use the time that you would listen to a podcast like this and go do something.
Absolutely.
And we'll let everyone know when we're back at it. And, maybe next week, it may be a couple months from now. But at the end of the day, when I say everyone has to be a part of the change, you don't have to be the leader coming up with all the fresh ideas. There's actually plenty of fresh ideas out there. We do need a whole bunch of first followers who are willing to say, I'm willing to do a little bit every day. And that can create a sort of tsunami of hope and actual change that holds leaders accountable for actually delivering the change. Because I think we're all tired of talking about it and it never happening. So I just want to throw that out there into the universe to say, I get how people can feel disgruntled. I get how people can feel like this is a bunch of BS and it's great to talk about, but like, how does this really work? And it really works one person at a time. I wish that there was a faster way to do it. I really do.
Absolutely. I would encourage every listener, go find that YouTube video that Chris is talking about. It's one of my favorite. Maybe type into the search bar on YouTube, the power of the first follower. Because what you're really talking about is there's a grassy slope. There's a bunch of people hanging out, sitting down on blankets, and one guy's dancing, kind of looks crazy, silly, just doesn't care what anyone thinks, and is just doing his thing. And everyone's kind of chuckling, laughing at him. But very quickly, within about 2-3 minutes, somebody joins him. They start dancing. Then somebody else joins. Then it becomes 10 or 20 people. And by the end of the video, the entire hillside has converged around this one guy. And there's probably 100 people dancing. And there's nobody sitting down laughing. There's nobody making fun of them. Everybody is now a part of the movement. And I think that's a brilliant way to summarize what we're challenging people. Thank you for bringing that up. I love that video.
Yeah, of course.
Chris, I appreciate you being willing to do a podcast with me. It is an honor to talk to you about these things. I love your perspective. I appreciate the time and energy you've put in to live a life where you can have some perspective and you've lived it. Thank you for being an example and being my friend and doing this podcast with me. And please scratch Patty behind the ears and tell her hi. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Yeah, and right back at you. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for doing this to me. I really do look forward to a future version of this at some point, and we'll figure out what that looks like. But genuinely, all the recommendations I've gotten from you over the years have gotten me into grad school. It's gotten me books that have really fundamentally shaped the way I view the world. And I think you're a good example of friends that we all need in our lives to keep pushing us to be a better version of ourselves. And so, you know, I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for
Yes,
being
sir.
a good friend. And I look forward to everything that we're going to do working together whenever that may be.
Absolutely. And Chris, when I think about my friendship with you, I immediately think of how thankful I am that there are people like you who are willing to serve and have served, and how lucky America is to have had you go to West Point and to do all the work you're doing, to write this book, to run for office. Everything that you've done has been an example of true leadership. And I would just also close out this podcast by saying to all the men and women in uniform, the civilians, the private contractors, everyone that is working to provide security and opportunity and growth for our nation. Thank you to those who serve, whether you're a firefighter, a police officer, a teacher, an ambulance driver, a legislator, a state and local government official, everybody that's putting in work. I just want to say, I salute you from the West Coast of California all the way to the East Coast. Chris, podcasting with you has been one of the best things I've ever done. I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, no, and thank you for being along for the ride. And I think that's a perfect spot to end on. It's just
Absolutely.
thank you for everyone who is serving. Thank you for your service. And I know that you're continuing to serve in different ways. And thank you for everyone who continues to serve even after they
Absolutely.
leave the uniform behind, because I think
Absolutely.
we are at a point in our time where we need as much of it as we can get. And I have met some of the best people in the world through our military
Yep.
service.
To all our listeners, to everybody that's out there, keep your head on a swivel, keep drinking water, always continue to search for truth and do the work. Have a great day.
If you haven't yet, please click like on this video, drop a comment below, and click that subscribe button. It'll help the YouTube algorithm make sure that these videos are getting into your feed. Thank you.